If you lie about being a virgin again, cara mia, the voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk, I will personally ensure you understand the consequences of testing my patience. The entire room fell silent. Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. That voice, low, controlled, lethal, didn't belong to Marco, the cocky capo she'd been dismissing. It came from behind her. From him. She turned slowly, her photographer's eye taking in every detail, the tailored charcoal suit that screamed power, not pretense. The face tattoo partially visible at his temple, a crown of thorns, she realized with a chill, that marked him as something far more dangerous than she'd assumed. The eyes that weren't merely angry, but glacial with a fury so controlled it was terrifying. Felipe Marino. Not a capo. Not even an underboss. The boss. And she'd just lied to his face. If you believe that even Mafia bosses deserve a chance at love, subscribe and like the story to show you agree. Victoria Barnett had survived worse than a Manhattan soiree filled with criminals in expensive suits. She'd photographed warlords in conflict zones, documented cartel compounds under the guise of architectural work, and talked her way out of interrogation rooms in 3 countries. A room full of Mafia peacocks preening for dominance? Child's play. The assignment was simple: photograph the Marino family's charitable foundation gala. Get the shots. Get paid. Get out. Don't engage with the various businessmen who'd inevitably try to collect her like she was another piece of art on the wall. She'd been doing fine until Marco Tesoro, a capo with more cologne than sense, had cornered her near the bar, his hand creeping toward her waist with the presumption of someone who'd never been told no. A woman like you, alone at an event like this? Marco's breath reeked of whiskey and entitlement. You must be looking for protection. Victoria had heard every variation of this pitch, the predatory undertone, the assumption that her presence was an invitation, the casual dehumanization dressed up as charm. So she deployed her favorite defense mechanism, strategic absurdity. Actually, she said, loud enough for the nearby cluster of men to hear, her voice dripping with false sweetness, I'm saving myself for marriage. Strict Catholic upbringing, you understand. Virgin territory. She smiled with all her teeth. Completely untouchable. Tragically unavailable. The lie was deliberate, outrageous, designed to make her too complicated, too sacred for casual predation. Men like Marco didn't want complicated. They wanted easy. The reaction was immediate, nervous laughter, a few knowing smirks, Marco's face flushing as he backed off with a muttered excuse. Victoria allowed herself a small, victorious smile as she turned back to her champagne. Then the room went silent. And he spoke. Felipe Marino materialized beside her like a storm front, his presence commanding space without effort. Up close, he was even more formidable, broad shoulders that filled his suit with athletic precision, hands that looked equally comfortable holding a pen or a weapon, and those eyes. God, those eyes. Cold. Calculating. And currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her spine straighten instinctively. You find your purity amusing, Signorina Barnett? His accent was slight, refined, but the Italian endearments sounded like threats. A joke to share with my men? His men. Not the men. His. Victoria's mouth went dry. She'd made the cardinal mistake. She'd assumed the man everyone deferred to was just another predator like Marco. She'd read the room wrong. Catastrophically wrong. She started, but Felipe stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, bergamot, and danger, close enough that the room seemed to shrink to just the 2 of them. Let me be clear, he continued, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through her chest. When you lie about your virtue in a room full of men who trade in information, you paint a target on your own back. You become valuable. Leverage. Do you understand? The photographic gala, the charitable foundation, the carefully curated image of legitimacy, it was all window dressing. This was a criminal empire, and she'd just announced herself as a weakness someone could exploit. I wasn't talking to you, Victoria managed, pride making her reckless. I was handling Marco. Felipe's laugh was brief and entirely without humor. Marco is a soldier who thought he could shop above his station. But you You just told a room full of people that you are both available and pure. In my world, that is an invitation to auction. The terror of understanding hit her like ice water. I didn't mean, what you meant is irrelevant. Felipe's hand moved, not touching her, but gesturing to someone behind her. Two men in dark suits stepped forward. Salvatore will escort you to your hotel. You will pack your belongings. Tomorrow morning, you will relocate to my estate in Westchester. What? Victoria's voice cracked with outrage. You can't just, I can and I am. Felipe's eyes never left hers, and for the first time, she saw something beneath the ice, a possessive heat that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with something far more primal. You made yourself my problem, Miss Barnett. You lied in my house, endangered yourself in my territory, and forced my hand. He leaned in, and Victoria's back hit the wall. She hadn't even realized she'd been retreating. So hear me clearly, you will accept my protection. You will move into my home. And if you ever lie to me again about your virtue, your intentions, or anything else, I will ensure you learn exactly why men like Marco fear men like me. His breath ghosted across her cheek as he added, almost gently, I protect what is mine, Cara. And as of tonight, whether you like it or not, you are mine to protect. Then he was gone, melting back into the crowd as if he'd never been there, leaving Victoria shaking against the wall with the horrible realization that she'd just gone from independent contractor to imprisoned ward of the most dangerous man in New York. And the worst part? The part that terrified her most? The dark, traitorous flutter in her chest that whispered she wasn't entirely opposed to being his. Victoria didn't sleep. How could she, knowing that at 8 o'clock sharp, Salvatore and his silent companion would arrive at her hotel to collect her like a piece of misplaced luggage? She spent the night pacing her room at the Greenwich, alternating between fury and fear, her camera equipment spread across the bed like the remnants of her former life. The life where she made her own choices. The life that had ended the moment she'd made a stupid, throwaway lie to discourage a handsy capo. When the knock came precisely at 8, she'd managed to shower, dress in jeans and a black sweater that felt like armor, and pack exactly nothing. A small, futile rebellion. Salvatore didn't comment on her empty suitcase. He simply waited, patient as stone, while she grabbed her camera bag and followed him to the black SUV idling at the curb. The drive to Westchester took 45 minutes. Victoria spent it cataloging escape routes she'd never use and trying not to think about the way Felipe's eyes had burned into hers last night. The way his voice had wrapped around mine like a promise and a threat. The Marino estate revealed itself gradually, first iron gates that whispered open, then a tree-lined drive that seemed to go on forever, finally a sprawling stone mansion that managed to look both elegant and fortified. Old money with new security. Cameras everywhere, she noted professionally. Guards trying to look like groundskeepers. A prison dressed as a palace. Felipe was waiting in what appeared to be a library, standing by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens. He'd traded last night's charcoal suit for dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and decorated with ink she couldn't quite make out from the doorway. He looked domestic. Almost normal. The illusion shattered the moment he turned and she saw his face. Miss Barnett. I trust the drive was comfortable. Not a question. Victoria lifted her chin. I'm here under duress, not as a guest. Let's not pretend otherwise. Something flickered in his expression, amusement, maybe, or approval. Direct. Good. Sit. I'd rather stand. I wasn't offering a choice. Felipe gestured to a leather chair position deliberately far from the door. Strategic. When she didn't move, he added softly, please. The please was somehow more threatening than any command. Victoria sat, her camera bag clutched in her lap like a shield. Felipe remained standing, which gave him the advantage of height and forced her to look up at him. Power play. She'd seen it 100 times in 100 different contexts, but somehow his version felt more intimate. More dangerous. Do you understand what you've done? He asked. Made a joke that you took personally? Made yourself a target. Felipe's voice remained calm, but his hands, those capable, dangerous hands, curled into fists at his sides. Within an hour of your little performance, I received 3 separate inquiries about you. Your background, your relationship to me, your availability. Victoria's stomach dropped. I don't have a relationship to you. You do now. He moved closer, perching on the edge of the massive desk that dominated the room. Close enough that she could see the crown of thorns tattoo extended down behind his ear, disappearing beneath his collar. The Vendetta crew asked if you were under my protection. The Russians asked if you were for sale, and the Calabrese family. He paused, and for the first time, she saw real anger crack through his control. The Calabrese family asked if your virginity was being auctioned, and if so, what the opening bid should be. The room tilted. Victoria gripped the arms of her chair, ball rising in her throat. That's insane. It was a throwaway line to get rid of Marco. I didn't think, no, you didn't think. Felipe leaned forward, and suddenly he was in her space, his hands on the armrests, caging her in. You walked into a room full of predators and painted yourself as prey. Innocent, untouched prey. Do you have any idea what that's worth in my world? I'm not actually, I don't care. The words were sharp enough to cut. The truth is irrelevant. Perception is everything. And right now, every family in the tri-state area perceives you as a vulnerability I'm either protecting or ignoring. Both positions make me look weak. Victoria forced herself to meet his eyes, even though being this close to him made her pulse hammer in her throat. So, this is about your reputation. This is about keeping you alive. Felipe's voice dropped to something raw, almost bewildered. You have no idea how many ways you could disappear. How many men would see claiming you as a way to humiliate me? How many would simply take you because they can? Then let me leave. I'll go back to Seattle, finish my contracts remotely, you're not leaving. He said it with such finality that Victoria's breath caught. You're staying here, where I can control who sees you, who speaks to you, who even knows you exist. You'll have a suite on the 2nd floor. Anything you need will be provided. Salvatore will accompany you if you need to go anywhere, which you won't. You're imprisoning me. I'm protecting you from the consequences of your own recklessness. Felipe straightened, putting distance between them again, and Victoria hated that she felt the loss of his proximity like a physical thing. This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Barnett. You made yourself my responsibility. I don't take my responsibilities lightly. I never asked for your protection. You announced yourself in my territory at my event, surrounded by my people. His eyes were cold again, the momentary heat banked beneath ice. That makes you mine whether you asked for it or not. There it was again. That word. Mine. Victoria stood, her legs shaky but her voice steady. And if I refuse? Felipe smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever seen, beautiful and brutal and absolutely certain. Then I'll have Salvador carry you to your room. You'll still stay. You'll still be protected. But you'll hate every moment of it. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Or you can accept reality, make the best of the situation, and perhaps we can find a way to coexist that doesn't require locked doors. That's not a choice. No, Felipe agreed. It's an illusion of one. But sometimes, Cara, illusions are all we have. He walked to the door, opened it, and gestured for Salvatore to enter. Show Ms. Barnett to the East Wing. Make sure she has everything she needs. Victoria wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything but meekly follow Salvatore out of the library. But she was smart enough to recognize when she was outmaneuvered. She made it 3 steps before Felipe's voice stopped her. Victoria. She turned despite herself. He stood framed in the doorway of his library, backlit by those massive windows, looking every inch the king of his dangerous empire. Welcome home. The East Wing was a gilded cage. Victoria understood that within the first hour of exploration. Her suite consisted of a bedroom larger than her entire Seattle apartment, decorated in shades of cream and gold that screamed old money. An ensuite bathroom with a tub that could double as a small pool. A sitting area with its own fireplace and bookshelves stocked with leather-bound volumes she suspected no one had ever read. French doors that opened onto a balcony with sweeping views of the estate's grounds. Beautiful. Luxurious. Completely fucking monitored. She'd found the cameras within 20 minutes, one disguised in the smoke detector, another in the decorative mirror near the door. Probably more she hadn't spotted yet. Her photographers I was trained to notice what didn't belong, and security equipment in a bedroom definitely qualified. The doors weren't locked, which was almost insulting. Felipe didn't need locks when he had Salvatore stationed at the end of the hallway and guards rotating past her windows every 15 minutes like clockwork. By day 3, Victoria's fury had calcified into something cold and sharp. She'd barely seen her captor since that first morning in the library. Meals appeared on a tray outside her door, gourmet, perfectly prepared, completely unwanted. She ate them anyway, refusing to give Felipe the satisfaction of her starving herself in protest. She spent her time editing photos on her laptop, responding to client emails with carefully worded excuses about a family emergency, and plotting a confrontation she knew was inevitable. It came on the 4th evening. Victoria had been testing boundaries, venturing further from her suite each day. The guards watched, but didn't stop her as she explored the mansion's public spaces, the formal dining room that could seat 20, the music room with its pristine grand piano, the gallery filled with art she suspected was both priceless and stolen. She found Felipe in a room she'd initially mistaken for another library, but this one was different. Lived in. Personal. Books stacked on every surface, some with worn spines that suggested actual reading. A laptop open on the desk. Papers covered in handwritten notes in what looked like Italian. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking so utterly normal that Victoria's anger flared white-hot. "Comfortable?" she asked from the doorway. Felipe looked up, unsurprised. Of course, he wasn't surprised. He probably knew exactly where she was at all times. "Ms. Barnett, do you need something?" Answers. She stepped into the room without invitation, satisfaction sparking when his jaw tightened. "Why am I really here?" I explained. "You gave me corporate talking points about protection and reputation." Victoria crossed her arms. "What I want to know is why you actually care. You're the head of a criminal empire. I'm a freelance photographer who told a stupid lie. The math doesn't add up." Felipe removed his glasses with deliberate precision, folding them and setting them aside. When he stood, Victoria fought the urge to step back. She held her ground as he circled the desk, stopping a careful 3 feet away. "You want honesty?" His voice was controlled, but something simmered beneath the surface. "Fine. You are a distraction I cannot afford. Your presence at that gala, your careless words, your complete ignorance of the world you stumbled into, all of it has created complications I now have to manage. Then let me go and the complications disappear." "No, they don't." Felipe's hands flexed at his sides. "The moment you walk out of this estate, you become fair game. Every family that inquired about you will see it as permission to make their own approach, to test whether you were truly under my protection or just a passing interest. So this is damage control. This is necessity." He took a step closer, and Victoria's pulse kicked up despite herself. "I have spent 15 years building an empire on the foundation of absolute control. I cannot appear weak. I cannot appear distracted. And I certainly cannot appear to have emotional investment in a woman who means nothing to me." The words should have stung. Instead, Victoria laughed, sharp and bitter. "If I mean nothing, why am I living in your home? Why the guards, the cameras, the luxury prison treatment? Because you made yourself a liability bullshit." The word cracked between them like a gunshot. Victoria closed the distance until they were toe-to-toe, her head tilted back to meet his eyes. "I've photographed enough powerful men to recognize obsessive behavior. This isn't damage control, Felipe. This is possession." His hand shot out, gripping her chin with enough pressure to make her gasp, but not enough to hurt. His eyes had gone dark, pupils blown wide, and for the first time since she'd met him, his control wavered. "You know nothing about me." "I know you've barely let me out of your sight since I got here," Victoria whispered, her heart hammering. "I know there are cameras in my bedroom. I know you have a guard posted outside my door even though you claim I'm free to move around. That's not protection. That's surveillance." "It's both." Felipe's thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Victoria hated the way her breath hitched at the touch. You are an unpredictable variable in a world where unpredictability gets people killed. I'm monitoring you because I have to, not because I want to. Liar. The word hung between them, dangerous and electric. Victoria watched fury and something darker flash across Felipe's face. His grip on her chin tightened fractionally. Careful, Cara. You've already lied to me once. Don't mistake my restraint for tolerance of your accusations. Then prove me wrong. Victoria's voice dropped to a challenge. Let me leave. If this is really just about your reputation and managing liabilities, then manage them without me. Send me home with guards if you're so worried. Put me in a safe house across the country. But keeping me here in your home and your space. She smiled without humor. That's personal. Felipe stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working like he was physically restraining words that wanted to break free. Then he released her chin and stepped back, his expression shuddering into that familiar ice. You'll stay because I require it. My reasons are my own and none of your concern. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. You're a complication I'm managing. Nothing more. The sooner you accept that, the easier this arrangement will be for both of us. You're lying to yourself. And you're testing my patience. Felipe moved back to his desk, effectively dismissing her. Dinner will be served at 7. You're welcome to join me in the dining room or take it in your suite. Your choice. Victoria wanted to scream. Wanted to throw something at his infuriatingly controlled face. Wanted to shake him until he admitted whatever truth was burning behind those carefully blank eyes. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked to the door, pausing at the threshold. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think you're more afraid of why you care than of any threat I might pose to your reputation. She left before he could respond, but not before she saw his hand clench into a fist on the desk, the only visible crack in his perfect control. Victoria made it back to her suite before her own hands started shaking. She'd pushed him, prodded at whatever possessive instinct he was trying to deny, and seen the beast lurking beneath his civilized surface. The terrifying part wasn't that she'd seen it. It was that some reckless, self-destructive part of her wanted to see it unleashed. Victoria found him by accident at 2 a.m, when her insomnia had driven her from her suite to wander the darkened hallways of the estate. She'd been careful, barefoot on marble floors, wearing only an oversized t-shirt and sleep shorts. The guards had changed shifts an hour ago. She'd memorized their rotation. Not to escape, she'd accepted that leaving wasn't currently an option, but because knowing their patterns gave her back some illusion of control. The light spilling from beneath a door at the end of the west wing stopped her. Not Felipe's study. Somewhere she hadn't explored yet. Victoria knew she should turn back. Privacy was a courtesy Felipe had denied her with his cameras and guards. She shouldn't extend it to him. But curiosity, that same reckless curiosity that had gotten her into this mess, pulled her forward. She pushed the door open soundlessly. The room was smaller than she'd expected, clearly a private space. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with volumes that actually looked read, their spines cracked and pages dog-eared. A worn leather couch. And in the center of it all, Felipe, sitting cross-legged on the floor in sweatpants and a t-shirt she'd never imagined he owned. A small dog, some kind of terrier mix, scruffy and gray, lay in his lap, breathing in shallow, labored gasps. Felipe's hand moved over the dog's fur in slow, gentle strokes, and he was murmuring something in Italian too soft for Victoria to catch. His reading glasses had slipped down his nose. His hair, usually perfectly styled, fell across his forehead in dark waves. He looked younger, softer, completely unguarded, and devastated. Victoria must have made a sound because his head snapped up, those dark eyes finding hers with laser precision. For a moment, she saw everything he usually hid: grief, exhaustion, a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. Then the shutters came down. You should be in your room. His voice was rough, scraped raw. So should you. Victoria stepped inside, closing the door behind her. What's wrong with him? Felipe's jaw worked. She thought he might order her out, reassert the boundaries they'd been dancing around for days. Instead, he looked back down at the dog. Cancer. The vet says it's time, but He trailed off, his hand never stopping its gentle motion. Dante was my father's dog. The only thing of his I wanted to keep. The confession felt like a gift, fragile and unexpected. Victoria moved closer, lowering herself to the floor a careful distance away. How old is he? 14. Ancient for a terrier. Felipe's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Stubborn. Refuses to admit when he's beaten. Sounds familiar. That earned her a sharp look, but there was no heat in it. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Dante's labored breathing. He was 8 when my father died, Felipe said quietly. Wouldn't eat for a week. I had to hand-feed him, sleep on the floor next to his bed until he trusted me enough to keep living. He adjusted his glasses with his free hand. Ridiculous, being undone by a 12-pound dog. It's not ridiculous. Victoria surprised herself by reaching out, her fingers brushing the terrier's soft ear. Dante's tail twitched weakly. Love isn't ridiculous, even when it hurts. Felipe's eyes locked on hers, and the intensity in them stole her breath. Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? She gestured to the scene, this powerful, dangerous man sitting on the floor at 2 in the morning with a dying dog, letting himself feel something real. All that control, all those walls you build. This is what you're protecting, isn't it? The parts of you that still feel. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Victoria shifted closer, emboldened by the darkness and his vulnerability. I've spent a week watching you pretend I'm just a liability. A distraction. But I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. The way you tense when I get too close to the guards. The way you stop. Why? She was close enough now to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Because I'm right? Because admitting you're attracted to me would mean admitting you're human. You're infuriating. But his voice had dropped to that dangerous register that made her stomach flip. You're a coward. Felipe moved with the speed she'd suspected he possessed, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted the fire in his eyes. Dante, disturbed, made a small sound of protest that neither of them acknowledged. I am many things, cara mia, Felipe murmured, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating precision. But I am not a coward. I'm a man who knows better than to touch something that will destroy him. Then why are your hands on me? Because I've been watching you for 7 days. The confession came out ragged, like it was being torn from somewhere deep. Watching you pace your room at night. Watching you test my guard's patience. Watching you look at me like you can see past every defense I've ever built. And I'm tired, Victoria. So fucking tired of pretending you don't matter. Her name on his lips felt like a claiming. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. Then stop pretending. Something in Felipe broke. She saw it happen, the moment his legendary control shattered like glass. His other hand tangled in her hair, angling her face up, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. Not gentle or exploratory, but consuming. Desperate. He kissed her like he'd been starving for it, like she was air and he'd been drowning. His teeth caught her lower lip, his tongue swept against hers, and Victoria heard herself make a sound that was part gasp, part surrender. She gripped his shoulders, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles, tasting the darkness and heat that he'd kept so carefully locked away. When his hand tightened in her hair, she arched into him, wanting more, wanting everything he'd been denying them both. Felipe pulled back first, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild. They stared at each other in the lamplight, both of them trembling. This is a mistake, he said, but he didn't let her go. Probably. Victoria's lips felt swollen, her body singing with want. Are you going to stop? His laugh was broken, almost painful. I don't think I can. He kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious and breakable. Dante wheezed between them, a reminder of the real world, but neither of them moved. When they finally broke apart, Felipe pressed his forehead to hers. You terrify me, he whispered. More than any enemy. More than any threat. Because I don't know how to protect myself from you. Victoria's hands found his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the rapid pulse at his throat. Then don't, she said simply. Maybe we protect each other instead. In the morning, Dante would pass peacefully with Felipe's hand on his fur and Victoria's fingers laced through his. But in that moment, in the small hours of the night, they simply held each other and pretended that the world outside that room didn't exist. What do you think Felipe fears more, losing control or admitting he's already lost it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The cold started the morning after Dante died. Victoria woke alone in her suite, the memory of Felipe's mouth on hers still burning like a brand. She'd left him at dawn, after the vet had come and gone with hushed condolences, after Felipe's hands had finally stopped shaking. She'd thought foolishly, she realized now, that something fundamental had shifted between them. She was wrong. Felipe became a ghost in his own house. Meals stopped appearing on trays outside her door. Instead, a housekeeper named Maria delivered them with apologetic smiles and no explanation. The guards rotated as usual, but Salvatore was conspicuously absent. And Felipe himself? She didn't see him for 3 days. On the 4th day, she caught a glimpse of him through the window of his study, talking on the phone with his back rigid and his hand clenched white-knuckled on the desk. When their eyes met through the glass, he turned away deliberately, ending the visual contact as cleanly as a severed cord. The message was clear. The man who'd kissed her like she was oxygen had vanished, replaced by the ice-cold Dawn who'd imprisoned her in the first place. Victoria should have been relieved. Should have welcomed the distance, used it to plan her eventual exit. Instead, she felt the rejection like a physical wound, which made her furious with herself and with him. By the 5th day, fury had crystallized into purpose. If Felipe wanted to pretend that night hadn't happened, fine. But Victoria wasn't the type to sit idle in her golden cage, nursing hurt feelings. She was a photographer, yes, but more than that, she was a researcher. An investigator. She'd built a career on finding the stories people tried to hide, on seeing what others missed. It was time to turn those skills on Felipe Marino himself. She started with what she had, her laptop, an internet connection she suspected was monitored but didn't care, and a professional database subscription she'd maintained for years. The kind journalists and private investigators used, the kind that aggregated public records, news archives, and financial filings into searchable formats. The Marino family had a surprisingly robust digital footprint once you knew where to look. Victoria began with the legitimate businesses, a network of restaurants, several import-export companies, a charitable foundation that actually seemed to do real work. All of it clean on the surface, the kind of empire that could withstand scrutiny. But her photographer's eye, trained to notice what didn't fit, caught the discrepancies. The shipping company that reported losses every quarter but somehow expanded operations. The restaurant that had been cited for health violations but never shut down. The foundation that donated heavily to political campaigns in very specific districts. Money laundering, political corruption, protection rackets. The infrastructure of organized crime dressed in 3-piece suits and tax-deductible donations. But it was the personal history that made Victoria's breath catch. She found the obituary first. Antonio Marino, 52, died suddenly at his home. Beloved father, respected businessman, pillar of the community. The date was 8 years ago. The cause of death conspicuously absent. A deeper search turned up the police report, buried in archived local news. Antonio Marino found dead of apparent suicide. No note left. Investigation ongoing. Except there was a follow-up article, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Marino death ruled homicide. Federal investigation launched. And then, 6 months later, Marino case closed. No charges filed. Victoria sat back, her mind racing. Felipe had been 26 when his father died. Young to inherit an empire, younger still to hold it against the vultures who would have seen the transition as an opportunity. She dug deeper, pulling up society pages and business journals from that period. There were photos of Felipe at charity galas, always in the background, always watching. His father had been the public face, Felipe had been the shadow. And after Antonio's death, the shadow had consumed everything. The transition had been brutal. 3 rival families had made moves on Marino territory within weeks of the funeral. All three had been systematically dismantled over the following year, businesses seized, leadership arrested on federal charges that seemed to materialize from nowhere, operations absorbed into the Marino empire. Felipe hadn't just survived his father's murder. He'd weaponized it. Victoria found herself in a digital rabbit hole, cross-referencing names and dates, building a web of connections that told a story of calculated vengeance and ruthless consolidation of power. She barely noticed when hours passed, when daylight faded to evening. What emerged was a portrait of a man who'd turned grief into armor, who'd buried his humanity so deep that even he seemed to have forgotten it existed. Until a scruffy terrier and a reckless photographer had forced him to remember. "You should eat something." Victoria's head snapped up. Felipe stood in her doorway, his expression unreadable. She hadn't heard him approach, too lost in research. Her laptop screen still glowed with archived photos of his younger self. "How long have you been standing there?" Her voice came out rougher than intended. "Long enough to see you've been busy." He stepped into the room, and Victoria instinctively shifted her laptop so he couldn't see the screen. His mouth tightened. "Researching me, Victoria? Should I be flattered or concerned? You've been avoiding me for 5 days." She closed the laptop with deliberate calm. "I got bored. So you decided to dig into my family history. I decided to understand the man who kissed me like I mattered and then disappeared like I was toxic." Victoria stood, surprised by her own boldness. "You want to know what I found?" "I'm sure you'll tell me." "I found a ghost." She moved closer, watching his jaw clench. "A man so committed to being invulnerable that he can't admit when something or someone gets past his defenses. Your father was murdered, and you spent 8 years making sure no one could ever hurt you like that again. Control isn't just your strategy, Felipe. It's your religion." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with carefully controlled pressure. "You don't know anything about my father. I know you loved him. I know losing him nearly destroyed you. And I know," she pulled her wrist free, holding his gaze, "that you're terrified I might do the same thing." The silence stretched between them, electric and dangerous. "You're not a liability," Felipe said finally, his voice low and rough. "You're a weapon I didn't see coming. Is that why you're here?" "To neutralize the threat. I'm here because Maria said you haven't eaten all day, and he stopped, clearly furious with himself for the slip. "Because I need you healthy." "Liar." But Victoria smiled without humor. "You came because you can't stay away any better than I can stop pushing." Felipe stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Control versus honesty. Safety versus risk. "This can't happen," he said, but he didn't move away. "It already has." His eyes dropped to her laptop. "What else did you find?" Victoria considered lying, protecting him from her intrusion. Then she remembered his hand in her hair, the desperation in his kiss, the way he'd whispered that she terrified him. "Everything," she said simply. "Which means I'm not just a photographer anymore, am I? I'm someone who sees you. All of you." Felipe's expression shifted into something she couldn't read. "And that doesn't scare you?" "Terrifies me." Victoria reached out, her fingers brushing his. "But I'm still here." He caught her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "You shouldn't be." "Probably not. But neither should you, and yet here we are." For the first time in 5 days, Felipe almost smiled. Felipe told her about the trip over breakfast, the first meal they'd shared since the night with Dante. "I have business in Philadelphia. I'll be gone 2 days, 3 at most." He set down his coffee cup with precision that suggested the announcement wasn't as casual as he wanted it to sound. "Marco will be in charge of security while I'm away." Victoria looked up from her untouched eggs. "Marco?" "The handsy Capo from the gala." "The same. He's also one of my most capable men, despite his poor judgment at social events." Felipe's eyes locked on hers. "He knows you're under my protection. He won't touch you." How reassuring. "Victoria." Her name held a warning. "I need to know you'll stay here. No testing boundaries, no evening walks through the estate, no escape attempts." She smiled without humor. "Where would I go, Felipe? You've made it abundantly clear what's waiting for me out there." Something flickered in his expression, guilt, maybe, or regret. 2 days. Then we'll talk. really talk about what happens next. He left an hour later, and Victoria told herself the hollow feeling in her chest wasn't disappointment. She'd survived worse than 2 days alone. She didn't need Felipe's presence to feel safe. Except the compound felt different without him. Emptier. The guards seemed more numerous, their rotations more obvious. Marco checked on her twice the first day, his demeanor professional, but laced with an undertone that made her skin crawl. Not overtly threatening, just enough to remind her that Felipe's authority was the only thing keeping certain men in check. By the second evening, Victoria felt like the walls were closing in. She'd spent the day editing photos, responding to increasingly urgent client emails, trying to maintain the fiction that her life was normal. But every hour stretched longer than the last, every creak of the old house making her jump. She kept catching herself listening for Felipe's footsteps, his voice, the particular way he commanded space without trying. At 9 o'clock, she made a decision that was equal parts rebellion and desperation. The guards changed shifts at 9:15. She'd memorized their patterns weeks ago, knew there was a 6-minute window when the East Garden was unwatched. Not enough time to escape, but enough to step outside the invisible fence to prove she still could. Victoria changed into dark jeans and a black sweater, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and slipped out of her suite with her camera bag. Just a walk. Just air. She'd be back before anyone noticed. The garden was cool and moonlit, the early spring flowers just beginning to bloom. Victoria breathed deeply, feeling something in her chest unclench for the first time in days. She raised her camera, capturing the play of shadows on marble statuary, the way moonlight turned the fountain silver. She was so focused on the shot that she didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Pretty night for a walk. Victoria spun. 2 men emerged from the shadows near the garden wall, their faces unfamiliar, but their intent crystal clear. They wore expensive suits, but carried themselves like predators, all coiled violence beneath polished surfaces. "I'm on private property," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You need to leave." The taller one smiled. "We're exactly where we need to be, sweetheart. You're the one who wandered off the reservation. Boss Marino know you're out here alone. Vendetta crew." The name came to her from Felipe's warnings, from the research she'd done. The family that had asked about her, that saw her as leverage. Victoria's hand tightened on her camera. "Touch me, and you won't live to regret it." Big talk for a virgin playing dress-up in a Don's house. The shorter one moved closer. "We just want to talk. Ask some questions about your arrangement with Marino." "The arrangement where his men shoot people who threaten me?" Victoria took a step back, calculating distances. The main house was 50 yards away. She could scream, but would they reach her first? "That arrangement? His men aren't here, princess. Just Marco, and Marco's got his hands full with a little distraction we arranged." The tall one pulled out his phone. "So why don't we take a walk to the car, nice and quiet, and step away from her?" Felipe's voice cut through the night like a blade. He appeared from the direction of the house, flanked by Salvatore and 3 other men, all armed. But Victoria's eyes locked on Felipe himself, his face a mask of fury so absolute it was terrifying. The vendetta men raised their hands, stepping back. "Marino, we were just trespassing on my property. Threatening what's mine." Felipe's gun appeared in his hand with practiced ease, aimed at the tall man's head. "Give me one reason I shouldn't end you where you stand." "It's a misunderstanding. You have 10 seconds to get off my land before I change my mind about letting you leave alive." Felipe's voice dropped to something glacial. 10. 9. They ran. Actually ran, scrambling over the garden wall like amateur criminals instead of organized crime. Felipe's men moved to follow, but he raised a hand. "Let them go. I want their boss to know exactly what happened here." He holstered his weapon, then turned to Victoria, and the fury in his eyes transformed into something raw. "Inside. Now." Victoria expected shouting. Expected the cold, controlled anger she'd seen before. Instead, Felipe gripped her shoulders the moment they were alone in his study, his hands shaking. "You scared me, Cara." The admission came out broken, ragged. Victoria stared at him, seeing past the dawn to the man beneath, The one who'd driven back early, who'd somehow known she was in danger. I know. His forehead dropped to hers, his breathing uneven. I know you feel trapped. I know I've taken your freedom and given you nothing but fear in return. But when Marco called and said you were gone, when I realized those bastards were already watching the house, he pulled back, his hands cupping her face. I have faced down rival families, federal investigations, assassination attempts. None of it terrified me like the thought of losing you. You came back. Victoria's hands found his wrists, holding on. You were in Philadelphia. I was in the car when Marco called. I turned around and broke every traffic law between here and there. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. You think I could focus on business knowing you were here? Knowing I'd left you vulnerable? I'm not your responsibility. You're everything. The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. Felipe closed his eyes, his jaw clenching. I don't know when it happened. When you stopped being a complication and became the only thing that matters. But I won't survive if something happens to you. Victoria rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was softer than their first, gentler, but no less devastating. When she pulled back, Felipe's eyes were wet. Then stop trying to protect me by keeping me at a distance, she whispered. Let me in. Let me help. Let me be your partner instead of your prisoner. His laugh was broken. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then show me. Felipe kissed her again, and this time when his control shattered, Victoria was there to catch the pieces. Later, wrapped in his arms on the leather couch in his study, she felt his heartbeat against her back. No more leaving the compound without me, he murmured into her hair. Not because I don't trust you. Because I can't lose you. Okay, Victoria agreed. Then, softer, I scared myself too. His arms tightened around her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the compound felt less like a prison and more like home. If you were in Victoria's position, would you have stayed in the garden or run back to the house? Subscribe to see how their dangerous partnership unfolds. The envelope arrived at breakfast, hand-delivered by a courier who disappeared before Salvatore could question him. Felipe opened it with the controlled precision Victoria had come to recognize as his tell for barely contained rage. She watched his jaw tighten as he read, watched the muscle jump in his temple, watched his knuckles go white around the heavy cardstock. What is it? She asked, setting down her coffee. He slid the card across the table without a word. The script was elegant, almost mocking in its formality. We understand the Virgin is still under your protection. How generous of you to shelter such innocence. We wonder how long that can last in your world. Perhaps we should test her resilience ourselves. The Vendetta family looks forward to meeting her properly. Below the words was a photograph, Victoria in the garden 2 nights ago, taken with a telephoto lens. The angle suggested it had been shot from outside the wall, confirming what they both knew. The Vendetta crew had been watching long before those men approached her. Victoria's stomach went cold. They were there the whole time. Yes. Felipe's voice was deadly calm. Which means the men I sent running weren't a scouting party. They were a message. The Vendetta family wanted me to know they can reach you whenever they choose. So, what do? We remove their leverage. Felipe stood, moving to the window with his hands clasped behind his back. There's a meeting tomorrow night. All 5 families, neutral ground, quarterly business. I've avoided bringing you into that world, but after this, he gestured to the card. Avoiding it is no longer an option. Victoria processed that. You want to parade me in front of them. I want to make it clear that you are not vulnerable prey. That you are under my protection not because you're weak, but because you're mine. He turned to face her. But that only works if you can hold your own in a room full of predators who will be looking for any sign of weakness. I've photographed warlords, Felipe. I think I can handle some mobsters in suits. His smile was sharp. These aren't men who pose for cameras, Cara. These are men who will test you, probe for weakness, try to determine if you're truly an asset or just a pretty distraction. If they sense fear, they'll exploit it. If they sense ignorance, they'll use it against me. Then teach me. Victoria stood, moving to stand in front of him. You said you wanted a partner. Prove it. Show me how to be what you need. Something shifted in Felipe's expression, surprise, maybe, or approval. This isn't a game. I know. That's why I need to be ready. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded sharply. My study, 1 hour. Where's something you can move in? Victoria arrived early, dressed in black leggings and a fitted top, her hair pulled back. Felipe was already there, the furniture pushed aside to create an open space. He'd changed into slacks and a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the sight of him like this, prepared to train rather than intimidate, made her pulse quicken. First lesson, he said without preamble. In my world, power is about perception. You need to walk into that room like you belong there. Not as my guest, but as my equal. I'm not your equal. In title, no. In presence, you need to be. He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Stand straighter. Shoulders back. When you walk, you lead with confidence, not apology. His touch was professional but intimate, adjusting her posture with the same precision he applied to everything. Victoria felt heat bloom where his fingers pressed against her skin. Better, he murmured. Now, eye contact. In that room, looking away first is submission. You hold their gaze until they break or until you choose to release them. He moved to face her, and the intensity in his dark eyes was almost overwhelming. Victoria forced herself to hold steady, to meet that burning gaze without flinching. Seconds stretched. Her heart hammered. But she didn't look away. Felipe's mouth curved slightly. Good. You have the nerve for it. Now we work on the words. He spent the next hour drilling her on the family's names, hierarchies, recent power shifts. The Calabrese family, old money and older grudges. The Russians under Dmitry Volkov, brutal and efficient. The Irish contingent led by Sean O'Malley, more political than the others. And the Vendetta crew, headed by Anthony Vendetta himself, the one who'd sent the threat. Anthony will target you directly, Felipe said. He'll make comments about your virginity, try to embarrass you or make you defensive. What do? Victoria considered. I ignore him? No, ignoring shows you're bothered. You acknowledge, dismiss, and redirect. He stepped into her space, his voice dropping into a cruel mockery. So tell me, sweetheart, is Marino keeping you pure for a special occasion, or did he already sample the goods? The shift was jarring, Felipe's natural authority twisted into something ugly. But Victoria understood the test. She lifted her chin, letting ice settle into her expression. I'm sorry, I don't discuss my intimate arrangements with strangers. But if you're looking for recommendations, I'm sure Mr. Marino could suggest someone more appropriate for your level. Felipe's eyes flashed with something hot and approving. Perfect. You acknowledged the question, insulted him subtly, and made it clear you won't engage on his terms. Again. They ran through scenario after scenario. How to deflect questions about her background. How to respond to casual misogyny without appearing weak or overly aggressive. How to position herself physically to show she was with Felipe, not behind him. You're a photographer, Felipe said at one point. Use that. These men are used to being invisible in their power. If you study them like subjects, catalog their tells, you'll make them uncomfortable. Uncomfortable men make mistakes. Is that what you do? Always. He moved closer, his hands framing her face. But with you, I can't seem to maintain any professional distance. You've destroyed every defense I have. Victoria's breath caught. Is that a problem? It should be. Instead, it's becoming the only thing I'm certain of. His thumb traced her lower lip. Tomorrow night, when we walk into that meeting, every man in that room will see that I've chosen you. That you're not a weakness to exploit, but a strength they should fear. And what will you see? Felipe's smile was slow, predatory, and entirely hers. The woman who brought the untouchable Dawn to his knees. He kissed her then, thorough and possessive, and when he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. One more lesson, he said, his voice rough. When they look at you tomorrow, they need to see someone who knows exactly how dangerous she is. Someone who chose this life, this man, with full knowledge of the cost. And if I'm not sure I know the cost, then I'll spend the rest of tonight showing you. Felipe's hand slid into her hair, tilting her face up. Every beautiful, terrible consequence of being mine. Victoria rose on her toes, her lips a breath from his. Then stop talking and start teaching, Don Marino. His control shattered beautifully, and the rest of the afternoon became a different kind of training entirely, one that taught her exactly how much power she held over the most powerful man in New York. By the time evening fell, Victoria understood the cost, and she was willing to pay it. Night settled over the estate like a held breath. Victoria stood on her balcony, watching the security lights patrol the perimeter in their endless rotation, and tried to ignore the anxiety coiling in her stomach. Tomorrow, she would walk into a room full of men who traded in violence and called it business. Men who would see her as either a weakness to exploit or a threat to neutralize. And she would do it on the arm of a man who still hadn't told her what she actually meant to him beyond mine. The knock on her door came at midnight. She knew it was Felipe before she opened it, recognized the particular cadence of his knock, the way he waited exactly 3 seconds before knocking again. He stood in her doorway in sleep pants and a t-shirt, barefoot, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. Without the armor of his suits, he looked younger, more uncertain. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Every time I close my eyes, I see tomorrow going wrong in 1,000 different ways." He stepped inside without asking permission, moving to the window. "I keep thinking I should cancel. Find another way to handle the vendetta threat that doesn't involve putting you in that room." "We both know there isn't another way." Victoria closed the door, leaning against it. "Unless you're planning to go to war over me. Don't think I haven't considered it." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. She moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "Felipe, what are we doing?" The question came out softer than she'd intended. "Not tomorrow. Right now." "What is this between us?" He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was physically restraining words. "I don't know how to answer that. Try honesty. Just once, no strategy, no protection." "What do you want from me?" "Everything." The word came out harsh, almost angry. "I want everything, and it terrifies me because the last time I wanted something that much, it destroyed me." Victoria turned to face him fully. "Your father." "My father was executed in his own study while I was in the next room." Felipe's voice went flat, distant. "I was on a conference call, wearing headphones. I didn't hear the gunshot. Didn't know he was dead until I walked in and found him." He stopped, his hands clenching into fists. 3 minutes. If I'd walked in 3 minutes earlier, maybe I could have stopped it. Or maybe I'd be dead too." "Felipe, they never found who gave the order. 5 families in this city, and no one would claim it. No one would admit to killing Antonio Marino in his own home." His laugh was bitter. "So I made them all pay. Systematically dismantled anyone who could have been responsible. And I swore I would never care about anything enough to be that vulnerable again." Victoria's throat tightened. "Then I came along and ruined everything." "Yes." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was staggering. "You walked into my world with your ridiculous lie and your fierce independence and your complete inability to be intimidated, and you made me feel things I'd buried so deep I thought they were dead." "What things?" "Hope." The word came out broken. "The possibility that maybe I could have something beyond this empire. Beyond the violence and the control and the endless fucking loneliness." His hand rose, fingers ghosting along her jaw. "And then the vendetta crew threatened you, and I realized that caring about you has painted the biggest target imaginable on both our backs. So, what do you want to do about it?" Victoria caught his hand, pressing it firmly against her cheek. "Push me away? Lock me up tighter? Pretend tomorrow night is just business. I want to keep you safe. I want you to be honest." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tell me what you're really afraid of." Felipe's eyes closed. "I'm afraid that I'll fail you the way I failed my father. That I'll be too focused on the wrong thing, too certain of my control, and someone will take you from me. And I won't survive it, Victoria. I barely survived losing him. Losing you would end me." The confession hung between them, raw and devastating. Victoria rose on her toes, pressing her forehead to his. "Then stop trying to protect me from a distance," she whispered. "Let me be close enough to protect you too. You shouldn't have to, neither should you. But here we are." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I'm not asking for promises about forever. I'm asking you to stop carrying everything alone. Just for tonight. Something in Felipe's expression cracked open. I don't know how. Start by staying. Victoria took his hand, leading him toward the bed. Not for sex. Just stay. Let me be here with you. She saw him war with himself, saw the ingrained need for control battle against the exhausted longing for connection. Finally, he nodded. They lay down facing each other, the lamplight casting shadows across Felipe's features. Victoria reached out, tracing the crown of thorns tattoo that disappeared behind his ear. When did you get this? The day after my father's funeral. It felt appropriate, a reminder that power comes with pain. His hand found her waist, his thumb stroking small circles through her shirt. Everyone said I was too young to hold the family together, that I'd be eaten alive within 6 months. They underestimated you. They didn't account for how ruthless grief could make someone. He shifted closer until their knees touched. I became the Don everyone feared because I had nothing left to lose. Until you. Victoria's fingers moved to his face, mapping the sharp lines of his jaw, the slight stubble, the faint scar above his eyebrow. Tell me about him. Not the Don. Your father. Felipe's eyes softened. He loved old movies. Black and white classics. Every Sunday, we'd watch one together in his study. He'd quote the dialogue, explain the cinematography. A real smile touched his lips. He would have liked you. Your eye for detail, your refusal to back down. My talent for getting into trouble? Especially that. Felipe's hand slid up to cradle her face. He always said the right woman would be the one who challenged me instead of cowering. I thought he was romantic. Turns out he was prophetic. They talked for hours, their voices soft in the darkness. Felipe told her about growing up in two worlds, the legitimate businessman's son at school, the Mafia prince at home. Victoria shared stories of her childhood moving between war zones with photojournalist parents, learning to see beauty in broken places. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Felipe pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her with a gentleness that contradicted his reputation. Victoria settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. I'm still terrified, he murmured into her hair. Tomorrow, the meeting, everything that comes after. Me too, Victoria admitted. But maybe we can be terrified together. His arms tightened. I need you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they say or do, you've already changed everything. You've made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a title. Victoria tilted her face up, pressing a soft kiss to his jaw. Then let's make sure we both survive to explore what that means. Felipe captured her mouth in a kiss that was tender rather than passionate, a promise rather than a demand. When they broke apart, he kept her close, his fingers threading through her hair. Stay with me, he whispered. Not just tonight. After tomorrow, after all of this. Choose to stay. I already have, Victoria said simply. I chose the moment I stopped trying to escape. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. But in the quiet darkness, with no audience and no strategy, they let those walls crumble. And for the first time in 8 years, Felipe Marino slept through the night without nightmares. The restaurant was closed to the public, its elegant private dining room transformed into a theater of power. 5 tables arranged in a careful pentagon, each family commanding their territory. Overhead lights cast dramatic shadows, and the air hummed with carefully controlled hostility. Victoria felt every eye track her movement as she entered on Felipe's arm. She dressed with strategic precision, a black silk dress that was elegant without being provocative, her hair swept up to expose her neck, minimal jewelry except for diamond earrings Felipe had given her that morning. She looked expensive, untouchable, and completely unbothered by the predatory attention. Felipe's hand rested possessively at the small of her back, his touch both reassuring and claiming. He guided her to their table where Salvatore and Marco already sat, their expressions professionally neutral. Gentlemen, Felipe said, his voice carrying the particular authority that came from never having to raise it. Thank you for accommodating my guests this evening. Anthony Vendetta spoke from across the room, his smile razor-sharp beneath silver hair. We were intrigued by your request, Marino. You've never brought a woman to these meetings before. She must be quite special. She is. Felipe pulled out Victoria's chair personally, a gesture that was equal parts courtesy and declaration. Ms. Victoria Barnett, a photographer of some renown. Victoria met Anthony's gaze steadily, cataloging details the way Felipe had taught her. The slight tremor in the older man's left hand, Parkinson's, maybe, or just age. The way his lieutenant sat too rigidly, suggesting recent discipline. The expensive watch that didn't quite match his suit, new money trying to look established. Weaknesses everywhere, once you knew how to look. Dmitry Volkov, the Russian contingent leader, leaned back in his chair. Photographer? How artistic. Tell me, Ms. Barnett, what do you photograph? Landscapes? Portraits? Or perhaps more, intimate subjects? The implication was clear. Victoria smiled, cold and sharp. I specialize in powerful men in their natural habitats, Mr. Volkov. I find the contrast between public image and private reality fascinating. The things people try to hide are always the most revealing. A brief silence, then Sean O'Malley's Irish lilt cut through the tension. A woman with teeth. Refreshing. Though I have to wonder, Marino, if bringing her here is wisdom or distraction. Clarity, Felipe said simply, his hand finding Victoria's under the table. I wanted there to be no confusion about Ms. Barnett's status or my commitment to her safety. Anthony leaned forward, his smile turning predatory. Speaking of clarity, there's been some interesting gossip about your houseguest. Something about a declaration of virginity at your charity gala? Quite the claim for a modern woman. The room went still. This was it, the moment Victoria had been preparing for. You mean the strategic lie I told to discourage unwanted attention from Mr. Tesoro? Victoria's voice remained calm, almost amused. Yes, that was mine. Though I'm surprised you found it interesting enough to investigate, Mr. Vendetta. One might think you have more pressing concerns than the sexual history of strangers. Anthony's eyes narrowed. It becomes my concern when it affects the balance of power in this city. When a woman makes claims that paint her as valuable leverage, I made claims that painted me as complicated enough to be left alone, Victoria interrupted smoothly. The fact that multiple families interpreted a throwaway defense mechanism as an invitation to trafficking tells me more about your organizations than it does about my judgment. Shock rippled through the room. No one interrupted Anthony Vendetta. Certainly not a woman who'd been in their world for less than a month. Felipe's hand tightened on hers in warning, but Victoria pressed forward. I've spent the last 3 weeks researching all of you, she continued, her photographers cataloging their reactions. Mr. Vendetta, your operations have contracted by 18% since your nephew's arrest last year. Mr. Volkov, the federal investigation into your shipping routes has 3 witnesses in protective custody. Mr. O'Malley, your political allies are facing primary challenges in districts you've held for 2 decades. She paused, letting the implications settle. You're all bleeding power and looking for easy targets to reassert dominance. I'm not one. I'm not leverage against Felipe because I'm not a victim. I'm a partner who sees everything, forgets nothing, and has absolutely no interest in being anyone's pawn. The silence was absolute. Victoria felt Felipe's shock radiating through their joined hands, but she kept her eyes locked on Anthony. The older man's face had gone red. You dare, I dare because I have nothing to lose by speaking truth and everything to lose by appearing weak. Victoria stood, and Felipe rose with her automatically. You sent men to threaten me in the garden, Mr. Vendetta. You had me photographed and watched. You tried to make me afraid. Instead, you gave me motivation to learn exactly who I was dealing with. That was your mistake. She turned to Felipe, whose expression had shifted from shock to something that looked like awe. I believe we've made our point, she said quietly. Unless there's actual business to discuss? Felipe stared at her for a long moment, then turned to address the room with a voice that brooked no argument. Let me be absolutely clear, he said, his arm sliding around Victoria's waist. Ms. Barnett is not my weakness. She is my strength. She is under my protection not because she needs it, but because I will destroy anyone who touches what is mine. And she is mine by her choice, not my compulsion. He looked down at Victoria, and the heat in his eyes made her breath catch. She sees the world I've built and chooses to stand in it anyway. She knows exactly who and what I am, and she stays. That makes her more dangerous than any of you could comprehend, because a woman who chooses this life with open eyes is a force you cannot predict or control. Victoria felt his words settle over her like a vow. Around the room, she watched the other families recalculate, reassess. She was no longer just Marino's pretty distraction. She was a player in her own right. Anthony Vendetta recovered first, raising his glass in a mock toast. Well then, welcome to the family business, Miss Barnett. I suspect you'll make things very interesting. I suspect you're right, Victoria replied, allowing herself a small smile. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. When men addressed Felipe, they now acknowledged Victoria with careful respect. When business was discussed, she listened with the attention of someone cataloging ammunition for future use. As they left 2 hours later, Felipe pulled her close in the back of the SUV, his lips finding her temple. "You magnificent, terrifying woman," he murmured. "You just declared war on the most dangerous men in New York and made it look like a courtesy. I learned from the best." Victoria turned in his arms, seeing the pride and desire and something deeper in his eyes. "Did I overstep?" "You were perfect." He kissed her thoroughly, possessively. "You walked into that room as my guest and left as my equal. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How powerful?" Victoria smiled against his mouth. "Tell me later. Right now, I just want to go home." "Home," Felipe repeated, the word holding weight and promise. "Yes, let's go home." And as the city lights blurred past the windows, Victoria realized that somewhere between imprisonment and partnership, Felipe's estate had stopped being a cage and started being exactly that, home. What would you have said to disarm Anthony Vendetta? Drop your strategy in the comments below. They didn't speak on the drive home, but the silence thrummed with energy. Felipe's hand stayed locked with Victoria's, his thumb tracing patterns on her wrist that felt like a language they were both still learning. When they reached the estate, he pulled her straight to his study, the real one, not the formal library where he conducted business. The room where she'd found him with Dante, where he kept the pieces of himself he showed no one else. He poured them both scotch with hands that weren't quite steady, then turned to face her. "What you did tonight," he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You didn't just protect yourself. You protected me. Protected us. That's what partners do." Victoria took the glass he offered, but didn't drink. "Though I should probably confess something." Felipe's eyebrow rose. "Another strategic lie?" "A strategic omission." She set down her glass and moved to his desk, pulling up the laptop she'd been using for research. "When I told you I'd been researching your family, I undersold my capabilities." She opened a file directory that made Felipe's eyes widen. Folders labeled with each family name, subcategories for businesses, political connections, financial irregularities. A web of information that would have taken most people months to compile. "I have a photographic memory," Victoria said quietly. "Not the movie version where I can recite entire books, but close. I see patterns, remember details, make connections that most people miss. It's why I'm good at photography. I don't just capture images, I capture information." Felipe moved closer, scanning the files. "This is comprehensive. I can track digital trails, find the gaps in public records, identify the shell companies and front operations. I see the architecture of power structures the way you see people." She turned to face him. "I didn't tell you before because I wasn't sure if I wanted to use those skills in your world. If I wanted to become complicit in what you do. And now? Now I've already stood in a room with 5 Mafia families and threatened them with their own secrets." Victoria's smile was wry. "I think I crossed the complicity line somewhere around the time I chose to stay." Felipe was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between her face and the screen. "Do you understand what you're offering? This isn't just research. This is intelligence. Strategy. The kind of information that wins wars before they start." "I know." Victoria's heart hammered. "I'm offering to be your eyes in the places you can't see. To use my skills not despite what you are, but because of it. To choose this life with you, fully and deliberately." "Why?" The question came out raw. You could walk away. Take your skills anywhere. Build a safe life far from all of this. Why choose the danger? Victoria stepped into his space, her hands finding his face. Because safe sounds boring compared to being with you. Because I've spent my whole life documenting other people's stories, and I want to live my own. Because when I look at you, I don't see a monster or a criminal. I see a man carrying impossible weight, and I want to help him bear it. Felipe's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes suspiciously bright. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most reckless. Can't I be both? His laugh was shaky. Victoria Barnett, will you stand with me? Not as my possession or my protected treasure, but as my partner in everything, the legitimate business and the shadow empire, the public image and the private war, all of it. On one condition. Victoria's voice steadied with certainty. You stop trying to shield me from the darkness. You let me see all of it, the violence, the compromises, the impossible choices. I want the truth, not the sanitized version. The truth will change how you see me. The truth will let me see you clearly. There's a difference. She rose on her toes, pressing her forehead to his. I love you, Felipe. Not the dawn, not the empire, not the power. You. The man who mourns his dog and watches old movies and carries grief like armor. I choose you and everything that comes with you. Felipe kissed her like she was oxygen, like she was salvation, like she was the only solid thing in a world that constantly shifted. When they broke apart, his voice was wrecked. I love you. God help us both, but I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anything. His hands tangled in her hair. You're going to be targeted, threatened, used against me by people who want to see me weak. Then we make sure I'm never an easy target. Victoria's smile turned sharp. We make me so integral to your operations that removing me would cripple them. We make me dangerous in my own right. Felipe pulled back, studying her face with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Then he moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer she'd never seen him open. He pulled out a velvet box, but when he opened it, the ring inside wasn't a traditional engagement diamond. It was platinum, elegantly simple, with the Marino family crest etched into the band, a lion holding a crown, surrounded by text in Latin she couldn't quite read. This was my grandmother's, Felipe said quietly. She was the only woman in family history to be considered an equal partner to her husband. She ran the legitimate businesses while my grandfather handled the other side. When she died, my father put this away, said it should only go to a woman strong enough to wear it. He took her left hand, his thumb brushing across her ring finger. This isn't just a symbol of commitment, Victoria. It's a statement of position. Everyone in our world will recognize this crest. They'll know you speak with my authority, that your word carries the weight of the Marino family. It's not a cage, it's a crown. What does the Latin say? Victoria's voice came out whisper soft. Fortis et fidelis. Strong and faithful. Felipe met her eyes. Will you wear it? Will you be my partner, my equal, my strength? Victoria thought of the girl who'd walked into a Mafia gala with a camera and a careless lie. Thought of the woman who'd been imprisoned, then protected, then transformed. Thought of the future stretching ahead, dangerous and unpredictable and absolutely hers to choose. Yes, she said simply. Felipe slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. 3 months later, Victoria sat in what had become her office, a sun-drenched room on the second floor filled with computer equipment and photography gear in equal measure. She'd just finished compiling a report on the Calabrese family's political vulnerabilities when Felipe appeared in the doorway. Working late, he asked, moving behind her chair to press a kiss to her temple. Just finishing up. Victoria leaned into his touch, her eyes still scanning data. Did you know the Calabrese have been shorting their tribute payments by routing funds through a shell company in Delaware? Amateur hour, really. And what do you recommend we do about it? Depends. Do you want to call them on it publicly or use it as leverage for future negotiations? Felipe's hands settled on her shoulders, kneading gently. What would you do? Victoria considered, her mind running through scenarios with the efficiency she'd honed over months of partnership. Leverage. They're already weak from the federal scrutiny. Push them now and they might fracture completely, which destabilizes the whole city. Better to hold this card for when we need them compliant. My thoughts exactly. Felipe spun her chair to face him, his eyes warm with pride and love. You know, when I first threatened to make you understand the consequences of lying to me, this isn't what I envisioned. Victoria smiled, her hand rising to touch the ring she now wore without thinking. What did you envision? Honestly? I thought I'd scare you into submission, keep you safe through control, and eventually let you go when the threat passed. He pulled her to her feet, his arms circling her waist. I never imagined you'd become the most valuable asset I have. That you'd transform my entire operation with your insights. That you'd make me want to build something worth protecting instead of just surviving. Disappointed, astonished, grateful, completely undone by you every single day. He kissed her softly. Thank you for lying about being a virgin at my gala. Victoria laughed against his mouth. Thank you for being terrifying enough to make me stay. Is that why you stayed? Because I was terrifying? No. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, seeing her own reflection in those dark depths. I stayed because underneath all that control and power, I saw a man who needed someone to choose him, not his empire. And I'm selfish enough to want to be that someone. Selfish, Felipe repeated, his smile devastating. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Love. Partnership. The most dangerous and beautiful thing I've ever built. His hand found hers, his thumb brushing across the family crest on her ring. Welcome home, Mrs. Marino. I'm not actually yet, he interrupted, his eyes gleaming. But you will be. When you're ready, when you choose it the same way you've chosen everything else about this life. On your terms and your time. Victoria looked around the office she'd built, the life she'd claimed, the man she'd transformed and been transformed by. Outside, the estate's security lights painted patterns across the gardens. Somewhere in the house, Salvatore was running evening patrol. In the city beyond, 5 families moved through their dangerous dance, now with full knowledge that Victoria Barnett was a player to be reckoned with. She'd walked into Felipe's world as prey and emerged as a predator in her own right. Not despite her choice to love him, but because of it. Ask me again in 6 months, Victoria said, rising on her toes to kiss him. I want to make sure you can handle being married to someone more dangerous than you. Felipe's laugh was pure joy. Cara mia, you've been more dangerous than me since the moment you told that ridiculous lie. I'm just grateful you're using your powers for good instead of evil. Who says I'm using them for good? Fair point. He swept her into his arms, heading toward their shared bedroom. Then let's say I'm grateful you're using them with me instead of against me. As they disappeared into the private sanctuary they'd built together, the ring on Victoria's finger caught the light, a symbol of power, partnership, and the dangerous choice to love without limits. She'd warned the Mafia boss not to lie. In the end, the truth had set them both free. Thanks for listening to this story. Please subscribe and click the video on the left side of your screen. It's even more interesting than the one you just listened to.